A whispered phone call revealed a chilling plan. Separate two elderly lovers into distant nursing homes where accidents happen naturally. She never imagined they'd overhear every word and escape into the frozen Christmas night. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as the first rays of dawn pierced through the embroidered curtains. Margaret opened her eyes at 5 in the morning, as she had done for 71 years of life. Her wrinkled hands trembled slightly as she reached for the small wooden cross she kept under her pillow, a gift from her late mother that accompanied her every awakening. "Thank you, Lord, for another day," she whispered, though the words no longer carried the same hope they once did. There was something in this house that crushed her spirit, something invisible but as real as the cold seeping through the windows. She rose carefully to avoid waking Thomas, who snored softly with his mouth slightly open. At 74 years old, her husband had aged a decade in the last 6 months. The wrinkles around his eyes had deepened, and that mischievous light that always shone in his gaze had extinguished like a candle without oxygen. The kitchen was freezing. Christmas decorations hung from the walls with calculated perfection. Silver garlands, bright red ornaments, a small porcelain nativity set that Jennifer had bought from an expensive downtown store. Everything impeccable, everything soulless. Margaret began preparing breakfast with automatic movements. Toast, homemade jam, fresh orange juice. She knew exactly how each family member liked their food, having memorized every preference during the months they had been living there. "Good morning, Grandma." Michael's voice broke through her solitude like a ray of sunshine after a storm. Margaret turned and her face genuinely lit up for the first time that morning. "Good morning, my precious boy. Did you sleep well?" The 17-year-old approached and hugged her tenderly, something that in that house seemed like an act of rebellion. "Better than you, Grandma. I heard you get up very early." "Oh, son, I just don't sleep like I used to." Michael frowned, noticing the dark circles under his grandmother's eyes. He was about to say something when the kitchen door opened with studied elegance. Jennifer appeared dressed in an ivory silk robe, every hair in place, makeup already perfectly applied, though it was barely 6 in the morning. "Good morning," she sang with a voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Is breakfast ready?" "Almost, dear," Margaret responded, instinctively lowering her gaze. "Mrs. Margaret," Jennifer poured herself coffee in a fine porcelain cup. "I hope today's coffee is milder. Yesterday I mentioned to David that it upset his stomach." The lie floated in the air like toxic smoke. Michael clenched his fists under the table, remembering perfectly that his father had gone back for 2 cups of Grandma's coffee the day before. "I'm sorry, Jennifer. I'll use fewer grounds today. At your age, it's natural to get a bit confused with measurements." The venom drip disguised as understanding. "Don't worry, I know you're doing the best you can." Michael felt rage climbing up his throat. "Grandma's coffee has always been perfect. Dad said so himself yesterday." Jennifer's eyes fixed on her son with icy intensity. "Michael, don't interrupt when adults are talking, and don't complicate things for your grandmother by defending her from advice that's for her own good." Thomas appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on his wooden cane. The last few months had been cruel to his knees, but something in his hunched posture spoke of a weight that went beyond the physical. "Good morning," he murmured. "Mr. Thomas." Jennifer changed her tone to effusively cheerful. "How did you wake up? I hope you didn't have trouble sleeping with the wind noise last night." It was a verbal trap. Michael recognized it immediately. His mother was planting the seed of a non-existent complaint. "I slept well, thank you," Thomas responded cautiously. "That's good because Margaret mentioned to me yesterday that you were getting up a lot during the night." Another lie. "I'm worried about your health, Mr. Thomas. At this age, insomnia can be a symptom of more serious things." Margaret opened her mouth to protest that she had never said such a thing, but Jennifer's warning look silenced her. She had learned that contradicting her daughter-in-law only made things worse. David came down the stairs with his tie half done, distracted with his phone. At 42 years old, their son seemed to have completely forgotten how to look his own parents in the eye. "Dad, Mom," he greeted without looking up from the screen. "Honey," Jennifer glided toward her husband, adjusting his tie with perfect wife gestures. "Your parents are here. At least look at them." The reprimand was designed to make her look like the considerate daughter-in-law while pointing out David's supposed lack of attention. It was brilliant in its cruelty. David finally looked up. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, Mom." The words came out mechanical, without warmth. Margaret felt her heart shrink a little more. "Good morning, son," Thomas responded, searching in vain for some spark of the caring child he had raised. Jennifer served breakfast with theatrical movements, making sure everyone noticed her dedication. She placed the scrambled eggs prepared by Margaret in front of David, but with an artistic presentation she herself had added, "My love, eat well. You have that important meeting today." "Thank you, honey." David ate without even glancing toward where his mother silently cleaned the sink. The front door burst open. Sophia, the 15-year-old daughter, entered like an adolescent tornado, dragging her backpack and chewing gum loudly. "Good morning, family," she said without enthusiasm. "Sophia, good morning. Did you sleep well, princess?" Jennifer asked. "More or less. Grandpa was coughing last night and woke me up." Lie. Michael knew immediately because his room was next to his grandparents, and he hadn't heard any coughing. Sophia was repeating the script her mother had taught her. "Dad," David turned toward Thomas with an annoyed expression, "I already told you to take care of that cough. You're going to make the whole family sick." "Son, I didn't cough last night." "Thomas, please," Jennifer intervened with false patience. "It's normal that you don't remember. Sometimes nighttime coughing is unconscious." "But I was awake." Thomas raised his voice, something rare for him. Silence fell over the table like a heavy blanket. David looked at his father with a mixture of shame and annoyance. "Dad, lower your voice. The neighbors can hear." Michael felt something break inside his chest. His grandfather, a man who had worked 40 years as a carpenter, who had built with his own hands the house where David grew up, being reprimanded like a naughty child for defending his own truth. "I'm sorry," Thomas murmured, his shoulders sinking even further. Margaret touched his hand under the table, a small gesture of solidarity in the middle of the battlefield. Their wrinkled fingers intertwined briefly, silently communicating what they couldn't say out loud. "We endure together." After breakfast, when everyone had left and the house was submerged in tense silence, Margaret began to clean. Jennifer had gone out to handle some things, her usual excuse to escape while leaving all the housework to her mother-in-law. Thomas found her in the living room, kneeling in front of the Christmas tree they had decorated so carefully. The lights blinked in programmed sequences, cold and perfect, without the warmth of handmade decorations that used to adorn their old home. "Margaret," his voice came out broken, "how much longer are we going to endure this?" She got up with difficulty, each joint protesting. "I don't know, my love. I don't know. That woman is destroying us little by little. I know. And our son sees nothing, or doesn't want to see." Margaret approached the window. Snow began to fall softly over the garden, covering everything with a white blanket that made it seem the world was pure and innocent. What a beautiful lie. "Thomas, do you remember when David was little, and we taught him that family always takes care of each other?" "I remember." "What happened to that boy?" Thomas had no answer. He simply approached his wife and hugged her, two castaways clinging to each other in the middle of the storm. What neither of them knew was that at that precise moment upstairs, Jennifer was talking on the phone with a voice completely different from the one she used at home. A cold, calculating voice, devoid of any trace of sweetness. "Yes, I want information about nursing homes. No, not the expensive ones. I'm looking for something more economical. Do you understand what I mean?" A pause as she listened. "Perfect. And something important. I need 2 separate places. One for him, another for her. Yes, I know it's unusual, but I have my reasons. Exactly. When people are separated, especially at that age, things simply happen faster." Another pause. A dry laugh. "Location doesn't matter. In fact, the farther apart from each other, the better. No, I don't want them to be able to visit each other easily. Look, I know how it sounds, but trust me, it's for their own good. At that age, they need specialized care that we can't give them here." If Margaret had heard that conversation, she would have recognized the tone. It was exactly the same tone a snake would use if it could speak. Hypnotic, deadly, wrapped in apparent logic. When the sun reached its highest point of the day, Michael returned from school and found his grandparents sitting in the small room they shared. It was the only space in the entire house that Jennifer had allowed them to personalize, and even so, every personal object seemed like a concession, not a right. "Grandma, Grandpa," he called softly from the door. "Come in, son," Margaret tried to smile. Michael sat on the floor in front of them, his youthful height folding to be at their level. "I need you to know something." "What is it, Michael?" Thomas asked with concern. "I know what my mother is doing. I see how she treats you. I hear the lies she invents." His eyes filled with tears of frustration. and I can't stand staying silent anymore. Michael, don't get into trouble for us, Margaret pleaded. Grandma, you're my family, and family protects each other. He used the same words they had taught him when he was little. I need you to know you're not alone, that I know the truth. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. At least one of their grandchildren had inherited the heart that he and Margaret had tried to cultivate in their son. Outside, the snow kept falling. The house's Christmas lights blinked cheerfully, projecting dancing shadows that seemed to mock the darkness gestating inside. In a few days it would be Christmas Eve, the night the Anderson family would remember for the rest of their lives. But that, none of them knew yet. That evening, as Margaret washed dishes, her hands submerged in warm, soapy water, she stared at the window. Her reflection looked back from the darkened glass. An old woman with tired eyes and shoulders carrying invisible chains. When had she become this person? When had she learned to make herself small, to speak in whispers, to apologize for existing? Penny, for your thoughts? Thomas's voice startled her. She turned, wiping her hands. Just thinking about how we got here. We got here because we trusted family meant safety. Thomas leaned against the counter. We were wrong. Were we? Or did we just trust the wrong person? Thomas reached for her hand. In the empty kitchen, with only the refrigerator's hum as witness, he allowed himself complete honesty. I'm scared, Margaret. Not of dying, but of dying here, where we're treated like burdens instead of blessings. Margaret pressed her face against his shoulder. Me too. Two people who had weathered 51 years of marriage, who had survived poverty and loss, now faced their cruelest challenge, being unwanted by their own child. Upstairs, Michael lay in bed staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed with holiday messages, but he couldn't focus. His mind replayed the morning, his grandfather's humiliation, his grandmother's defeat, his mother's calculated cruelty. Something had to change. He didn't know yet that change was coming faster than expected, riding on the wings of a snowy Christmas Eve that would transform their lives forever. 3 days before Christmas Eve, the Anderson house awoke covered by a thick layer of fresh snow. Margaret watched through the kitchen window as the flakes spiraled down, accumulating on the bare tree branches. She remembered other Christmases when her children were small and they ran outside to build snowmen, their laughter filling the frozen air with pure music. What are you thinking about, my love? Thomas appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture they had repeated thousands of times in 51 years of marriage. About when we were happy, she responded, without taking her eyes from the window. We'll be happy again. Margaret wanted to believe him, but something in her chest told her things were about to get worse before they got better. Jennifer's phone rang from the living room. Margaret heard her heels approaching and then retreating toward the study, that room her daughter-in-law had declared a private space where no one could enter without permission. Yes, good afternoon. Jennifer Anderson speaking. Exactly, I called 3 days ago. Margaret felt a chill. Something in Jennifer's cautious tone activated all her alarms. Perfect. One spot in Meadowbrook for him, another in Riverside for her, yes, nearly 200 miles apart. That's exactly what I need. Margaret's hands trembled. She crept to the study door, heart hammering. No, they don't know anything until after Christmas. My surprise gift, a humorless laugh. I'll tell them their day centers, only a few hours. But once they sign admission papers, the law favors me. Margaret leaned against the wall. Her legs threatened to fail. Costs. The lower the better. At that age, with health problems, they don't need luxury services. What's important is they're supervised and separated. That's fundamental. Margaret held her breath, praying Jennifer wouldn't find her. They're elderly, fragile. In places with limited staff, emergencies aren't always attended to quickly. And if something natural occurs, well, it's life's cycle, isn't it? Especially when separated with no one visiting regularly. The words fell on Margaret like ice bullets. Jennifer didn't just want to get rid of them. She was planning their death by neglect. And she was planning to separate them, tear Thomas from her side after more than half a century together, so they would die alone, without the comfort of each other. Excellent. Then I confirm both reservations. Yes, I'll pay the deposit today. And remember, absolute discretion. No one in the family should know the details until after Christmas. Margaret stumbled backward, just as she heard Jennifer hanging up. She ran to the kitchen, pretending to prepare tea, but her hands trembled so much the teapot nearly fell. Mrs. Margaret, Jennifer's honeyed voice made her jump. Are you feeling well? You look very pale. I'm fine, dear. Just a bit tired. Jennifer approached with that smile that no longer fooled Margaret. You should take better care of yourself. At your age, stress can be very dangerous. She made a calculated pause. That's why David and I are thinking about something special for you after Christmas. Margaret felt nauseous. Something special? Yes, but it's a surprise. I can't ruin it yet. Her eyes shone with barely contained malicious satisfaction. It will be something that will change your life completely. When Jennifer left the kitchen, Margaret collapsed into a chair. The words thundered in her head like funeral bells. Places with limited staff. Emergencies that aren't attended to. If something natural occurs. Separated. Thomas entered and immediately knew something terrible had happened. His wife's face had lost all color. Margaret, what happened? With a trembling voice, she told him everything she had heard. Each word was a dagger driving deeper. When she finished, Thomas had to sit down, his cane falling to the floor with a clatter. My God, he whispered, our own daughter-in-law. Thomas, she doesn't just want to abandon us. She wants to separate us. She wants us to die alone, without having each other. Tears ran freely down both their wrinkled cheeks. 51 years together, overcoming poverty, illness, loss. And now, in the twilight of their lives, someone planned to separate them as if their love meant nothing. We have to tell David, Thomas said. And you think he'll believe us? That woman has him completely blinded. Then we'll leave. Where to, Thomas? We don't have enough money. Our pension barely covers medications. They looked at each other with desperation, feeling trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. That afternoon, when Michael returned from school, he found his grandparents in their small room, their eyes red and swollen. He immediately knelt in front of them. What happened? What did she do now? Margaret hesitated, but her grandson's sincere gaze convinced her. She told him everything. As she spoke, she watched fury grow in the boy's eyes, his hands closing into tight fists. That witch! Michael could barely control his rage. Grandma, Grandpa, you can't let this happen. We don't know what to do, son. You have to leave. You have to escape from here. Where? Thomas asked with hopelessness. Uncle Sebastian. He's always said his house is yours. Margaret shook her head. We can't just show up at his door like that. He has his own family, his problems. And you'd rather stay here and let Mum kill you. The crudeness of the words resonated in the small room, because that's what she's planning. Maybe not with her own hands, but the consequences are the same. Thomas squeezed Margaret's hand. Their grandson was right, and they both knew it. Michael, Margaret spoke slowly, forming a plan as the words came out. If we did this, we would need help. Count on me for everything. Your father will be furious. Your mother will invent horrible stories about us. Let her invent them. I know the truth, and Uncle Sebastian will know it too. During dinner, Jennifer was animated, talking non-stop about Christmas Eve plans. She had bought expensive ham, imported wine, new table decorations. It will be perfect, she announced, looking meaningfully at Margaret and Thomas. Perhaps the last we'll all spend together here. David, oblivious to the double meaning, smiled. The last one? Planning something? Next year things will be different. Jennifer sipped wine, savoring her secret. Michael exchanged glances with his grandparents. Sophia, absorbed in her phone, noticed nothing. Mom, Michael spoke with a controlled voice. What do you mean by different? Oh, son, they're surprises. I can't ruin everything by telling you now. But it involves Grandma and Grandpa. There was a moment of tense silence. Jennifer slowly set down her glass, her eyes narrowing. Michael, why are you always so worried about your grandparents? It's like you don't trust that I can take care of them properly. Maybe because I've seen how you treat them when Dad isn't around. The temperature in the dining room plummeted. David looked up from his plate, confused. What are you talking about, Michael? Nothing, honey, Jennifer intervened quickly. Your son is at that difficult age where everything seems wrong to him. She turned to Michael with eyes like knives. I think someone should learn to respect their mother more. And I think someone should learn to respect elderly people, Michael responded, holding her gaze. Michael, David hit the table. Apologize to your mother right now. The boy looked at his father, seeing the man he once admired turned into a puppet of a cruel woman. Sorry, he muttered without sincerity. Go to your room. No dessert. Michael stood up, but before leaving, he directed a look at his grandparents. It was a silent promise he wouldn't abandon them. After dinner, while Margaret washed the dishes, Jennifer approached her from behind. Mrs. Margaret, your grandson is becoming very problematic lately. He's just a boy, Jennifer. Teenagers are like that. No, it's more than that. I feel like he's trying to turn me against the family. She made a theatrical pause. I hope you're not filling his head with strange ideas. Margaret felt her heart racing. I would never do that. Because it would be very sad if a grandson lost respect for his family because of gossip from elderly people who sometimes confuse reality. The venom in each word was palpable. I don't know what you're talking about. Jennifer moved closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I think you know perfectly well what I'm talking about, and I'm going to give you free advice. Keep your mouth shut, because if you start filling my children's heads with stories, I can make things get very, very difficult for you. Margaret didn't respond, but her hands trembled violently as she rinsed a plate. That night, in the darkness of their small room, Thomas and Margaret whispered plans in voices so low they could barely hear each other. It has to be during Christmas Eve dinner, Margaret said, when everyone is distracted. And how are we going to communicate with Sebastian without Jennifer finding out? Michael will do it, tomorrow when he goes to school. Margaret, are you sure about this? We're talking about fleeing from our own son's house. She found his hand in the darkness, intertwining their fingers as they had done millions of times before. I'm sure I want to spend my last days by your side, not 200 miles away in some horrible place waiting to die alone. Thomas squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. Then we'll flee, together, as always. The next day, Michael called his Uncle Sebastian from the school bathroom, his hands shaking as he dialed the number. Uncle Sebastian, it's Michael. I need to talk to you about something very urgent regarding Grandma and Grandpa. He listened in silence while his nephew told him everything, the phone conversation, the separation plans, the real danger that Margaret and Thomas were in. That monster! Sebastian almost shouted into the phone. Michael, tell your grandparents to pack the essentials. I'll come for them. You can't come here. Mom will suspect something. Then let's decide on a meeting point. St. Michael's Church, it's 3 blocks from the house. During Christmas Eve dinner, I'll help them leave without anyone noticing. Michael, this is very dangerous for a boy your age. Uncle, they're my grandparents, they're my family. I'll do whatever is necessary to protect them. Sebastian felt pride and pain mix in his chest. Okay, I'll be waiting at the church at 10 at night. When Michael returned home that afternoon, he found Jennifer going through his grandparents' closet. Margaret's belongings were scattered across the bed. What are you doing? He asked, with a controlled voice despite his fury. Just organizing a bit. Your grandmother has too many things. I'm deciding what's worth keeping and what should be discarded. It was another form of control, another way to remind them that nothing in that house truly belonged to them. Those are her things, and I'm the owner of this house. I can decide what stays and what goes. Michael watched as his mother held an old wooden rosary, his grandmother's most treasured possession, a gift from her late mother. Jennifer examined it with contempt. This is so old and ugly. Don't you dare! Michael's voice came out as a growl. Jennifer raised an eyebrow, enjoying the challenge. Or what, Michael? What are you going to do? The boy took a deep breath, controlling himself. 2 days, he reminded himself. Just 2 more days, and his grandparents would be safe. Nothing, Mom. I'm not going to do anything. Jennifer smiled victoriously, dropping the rosary onto the bed. That's what I like. An obedient son. That night, Michael passed a folded paper to his grandmother while they cleaned the kitchen. Margaret read it with teary eyes. Sebastian is waiting. St. Michael's Church, 10 p.m. Christmas Eve. Pack only essentials. She looked at her grandson with infinite gratitude. He simply nodded and murmured, I love you, Grandma. I love you too, my boy. 2 days until Christmas Eve. 2 days for Margaret and Thomas to flee from the house where they should have been loved and cared for. 2 days to leave behind everything except their dignity and their mutual love. And Jennifer, oblivious to the storm coming, kept planning her victory, not knowing that sometimes the most fragile find a strength that the powerful never understand. The morning of December 23rd dawned grey and heavy. Margaret woke with a start, heart pounding. She had dreamed she was running through an endless hallway searching for Thomas, hearing his voice from some unreachable distance. Just a nightmare, Thomas murmured, holding her in the darkness. But they both knew the real nightmare awaited them awake. Today was the day. Tomorrow night, during Christmas Eve dinner, they would flee. The word echoed strangely in Margaret's mind. At 71, she never imagined escaping her own son's house, like a pursued criminal. "Do we pack today?" she whispered. "Little by little. Only the essentials." The essentials. After a lifetime, what was essential? Photographs of her children when small, her mother's rosary, the bracelet from their 20th anniversary, medicines, clothes for 3 days. They rose before dawn, but this time with different purpose. While Margaret prepared breakfast, her eyes scanned the kitchen, memorizing details. Perhaps she would never see this space again. The idea should hurt more, but all she felt was terrible, liberating relief. "Good morning." Jennifer's voice cut through her thoughts like a sharp blade. Margaret turned, forcing a smile. "Good morning, Jennifer. Mrs. Margaret, today I have many things to do to prepare for tomorrow's dinner. I need you and Mr. Thomas to stay out of the way." Perfect, Margaret thought. Exactly what they needed. "Of course, dear. We don't want to be in the way." Jennifer poured herself coffee, her cream silk robe floating as she moved. Tomorrow will be a very special night. Very special. Her eyes gleamed with contained satisfaction. "In fact, I have an important announcement to make during dinner." Margaret felt a chill. An announcement. Yes, about this family's future. Jennifer drank her coffee slowly, savoring the moment. "I think it's going to surprise everyone, especially you two." Thomas entered the kitchen at that moment, immediately catching the tension in the air. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas." Jennifer greeted him with that perfect false sweetness. "I hope you're preparing your best words of gratitude for tomorrow. You're going to need them." When Jennifer left, Thomas approached Margaret. What was she talking about? "She's making her announcement tomorrow at dinner, about the nursing homes." They looked at each other with silent understanding. They had to leave before Jennifer revealed her plans. They couldn't give her the opportunity to manipulate the situation in front of the whole family. Later that morning, while Jennifer was shopping, Margaret and Thomas began to pack. Each object carried memories' weight. The knitted scarf, photographs of grandchildren as babies, their worn Bible. "I can't take everything," Margaret sobbed, hugging an old album. "Our whole life is in these things." Thomas dried her tears. "Our life is here," he touched his chest, and here he touched hers. "Things are just things, my love." They stored belongings in 2 old canvas bags from the closet. No large suitcases, too much attention. They hid the bags at the closet bottom, covered with blankets. The doorbell rang, interrupting their preparations. Thomas went to open it and found a courier with a large envelope. "Mr. David Anderson." "He's my son. I can receive it." "I need a signature." Thomas signed with trembling hands. The envelope bore a geriatric institution logo. His heart sank. The papers, the cursed admission papers. When the courier left, Thomas opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, 2 admission contracts, Meadowbrook and Riverside. He read with growing horror. "Resident agrees to permanent transfer. Legal guardians have complete authority over medical decisions. Visits require prior guardian authorization." A prison disguised as a home. Jennifer had designated David as legal guardian, meaning she would have absolute power over their lives. "Thomas, what's that?" Margaret appeared in the doorway. He showed her the papers, watching the color drain from his wife's face. They read together each clause, each fine print that revealed the magnitude of Jennifer's plan. "It says, once admitted, we can't leave without authorization from the legal guardian." Margaret read with a broken voice. "Thomas, this is legal kidnapping." "And look at this." Thomas pointed to another section. "Monthly charges will be automatically deducted from our pensions. All our money will go directly to these places. Then we won't have resources to escape, even if we wanted to." They sat on the living room sofa, the papers trembling in their hands. Jennifer had planned everything with surgical precision. Once they signed those documents, or worse, once David signed them as legal guardian, they would be trapped. "We have to leave tonight," Thomas said urgently. "We can't wait until tomorrow." "But Sebastian can't come until tomorrow. And if we leave today, Jennifer will call the police. She'll say we're senile elderly people who got lost." They were trapped in an impossible dilemma. If they left too soon, Jennifer would chase them. If they waited too long, they might lose their window of escape. Michael came home from school and found his grandparents in a state of panic. "What happened?" Thomas showed him the papers. The boy read them, his face reddening with fury at each line. "This is illegal. It has to be illegal." "Technically, it's not," Thomas explained with a tired voice. "An adult child can be designated legal guardian of elderly parents if they prove they can't take care of themselves. But you can take care of yourselves." Jennifer will invent stories. She'll say we're confused, that we forget things, that we're dangerous to ourselves. Margaret crumpled the papers with impotent rage. And David will believe her. He always believes her. Michael paced back and forth, thinking. We need evidence, something that proves Mom is manipulating you. What kind of evidence? The boy pulled out his phone. I'm going to record her. If I can capture one of her phone conversations, or if I can get her to say something incriminating. Michael, it's very dangerous. More dangerous is doing nothing. His determination was absolute. Grandma, Grandpa, we need protection. Because even after you escape, Mom will try to bring you back. She'll lie, she'll manipulate. We need proof of her true intentions. That afternoon, while Jennifer talked on the phone in the study, Michael slipped down the hallway. He had left his phone recording, hidden in a potted plant near the door. His heart beat so hard he feared they would hear it. Jennifer's voice filtered through the slightly open door. Oh, they won't suspect anything. I'll tell them it's a day center, that they'll only go a few hours. By the time they realize it's permanent, it'll be too late. Michael held his breath. Look, I know it sounds cruel, but understand me. That house is worth nearly $500,000. Once they're gone, David will inherit it directly, and that pension they receive, though small, are expenses we won't have anymore. It's pure economics. There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end. Whether I care that they're his parents? Of course I care. Jennifer let out a cold laugh. I care about getting them out of my house as soon as possible. They fulfilled their purpose. They gave birth to my husband. Now they're a burden. Michael felt nauseous. He knew his mother was manipulative, but hearing her talk about his own grandparents like that, the plan is perfect. Tomorrow at dinner, when everyone is happy and celebrating, I'll drop the bomb. I'll tell them it's my Christmas gift for them, professional specialized care. David will be so grateful he won't question anything. And by the 26th, they'll be out of here. Another pause. And if they resist, well, that's what I have the legal guardianship papers for. David will sign whatever I tell him is for his parents' good. And once those documents are signed, legally they can't do anything. They'll be exactly where I want them. Far away, separated and slowly disappearing. Michael retrieved his phone with trembling hands. He had it. He had everything on recording. He ran to his grandparents' room. I got it. It's all here. They listened together to the recording. Margaret cried openly. Thomas clenched his fists with contained impotence, and Michael felt a mixture of triumph and revulsion. This is enough, Thomas said. Sebastian can use this if Jennifer tries to claim us legally. And I can send it to Dad, Michael added, after you leave. When he's alone and can listen to it without Mom manipulating him. That night David came home late from work, loaded with bags of gifts. Jennifer received him with an effusive kiss, helping him with the packages wrapped in shiny paper. All set for tomorrow? He asked. Everything perfect, my love. It will be an unforgettable Christmas Eve. And the surprise you mentioned? Jennifer smiled, caressing his cheek. Tomorrow, my love. Tomorrow we'll give your parents the best gift they could receive. David kissed her forehead, completely oblivious to the double meaning. You're a wonderful wife. My parents are lucky to have you. From the stairs, Michael watched the scene with disgust. How could his father be so blind? How could he not see the snake he had beside him? Sophia passed by him, glued to her phone as always. At least she was ignorant through indifference, not malice. Michael wondered how his younger sister would react when she discovered the truth about their mother. In their room, Margaret and Thomas reviewed the plan for the umpteenth time. Tomorrow, during dinner, when everyone was distracted with food and gifts, they would excuse themselves, saying they didn't feel well. They'd go up to their room, take their bags, and leave through the back door that opened to the garden. Michael would make sure to leave it unlocked. They would walk 3 blocks to St. Michael's Church, where Sebastian would be waiting. The route wasn't long, but with the snow and both their ages, it could take 15 or 20 minutes, enough time for someone to notice their absence. What if David looks for us? Margaret asked. By the time they realize we're not coming back, we'll already be in Sebastian's car, on our way to his house. What if Jennifer calls the police? Sebastian will talk to them. He'll tell them we're with him by our own will, and we have the recording as proof of why we had to leave. It was a plan full of uncertain variables, dependent on perfect timing and luck. But it was the only plan they had. Margaret got up and went to the small window in their room. Snow fell softly, covering the world with a white blanket that made everything seem clean and innocent. She remembered other Christmas Eves, when her children were small and the house filled with genuine laughter and true love. Thomas, do you think David will ever forgive us for leaving? Her husband approached, wrapping his arms around her from behind. We're not the ones who need forgiveness, my love. We're the ones who need to forgive. I don't know if I can forgive what Jennifer was planning to do to us. Then let's forgive our son for being weak, for letting himself be manipulated, for forgetting the lessons we taught him. Margaret leaned back against Thomas's chest, feeling the steady beats of his heart. 51 years together, and that heart was still her safest refuge. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Me too, but I'm more scared of what will happen if we stay. That night, neither of them really slept. They remained awake in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, the wind against the windows, the creaking of the pipes, Michael's occasional footsteps in the room next door, who also couldn't sleep. When the first ray of light filtered through the curtains, Margaret whispered, "It's Christmas Eve." "Yes," Thomas responded, "the day of our liberation." Downstairs in the lit kitchen, Jennifer prepared coffee with a satisfied smile. Tonight she would finally be rid of the burden of her in-laws. Tonight, her victory would be complete. What she didn't know was that the elderly people she had underestimated were about to show her that bodily fragility doesn't mean fragility of spirit, and that sometimes the weakest find strengths that the powerful will never understand. The countdown had begun. The church bells nearby chimed, announcing 6 in the evening when the Anderson family gathered around the table for Christmas Eve dinner. The dining room sparkled with candlelight. Crystal glasses reflected the tree lights, and the scent of glazed ham filled the air with promises of celebration. Margaret observed the scene as if she were behind glass. The perfectly coordinated decorations, expensive china, artistically folded napkins, everything beautiful and hollow, like theater scenery, waiting for actors to recite lines without feeling anything. "Merry Christmas Eve to everyone." Jennifer raised her wineglass, radiant in her red dress that cost more than Margaret and Thomas's monthly pension combined. "This is a very special night." David raised his glass, smiling at his wife with adoration. Sophia checked her phone with one hand while holding her glass with the other. Michael exchanged a loaded glance with his grandparents. Thomas squeezed Margaret's hand under the table. Their intertwined fingers communicated what their lips couldn't say. "Courage. This is almost over." "Mom, Dad," David addressed his parents with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I hope you enjoy this dinner. Jennifer has worked so hard to make everything perfect." Margaret had been the one who peeled the potatoes, prepared the salad, cleaned the entire kitchen for hours. But as always, Jennifer took the credit. "Everything looks beautiful, dear," Margaret murmured, playing her role one last time. "Thank you, Mrs. Margaret. Though I must confess," Jennifer made a dramatic pause, her eyes glinting with barely contained anticipation, "this dinner has a special purpose. I have an announcement to make." Michael tensed in his chair. It was too soon. His grandparents were supposed to excuse themselves before Jennifer revealed her plan. "An announcement?" David asked, intrigued. "Yes, my love. But first, let's eat. I don't want to ruin the meal with strong emotions." Jennifer's smile was that of a predator playing with its prey. The dinner dragged on with agonizing slowness. Each bite was ash in Margaret's mouth. Thomas barely touched his food, moving it from one side of the plate to the other, while the wall clock marked minutes with cruelty. Sophia talked non-stop about her friends' parties, oblivious to the tension electrifying the air. David commented about work, his words forming a backdrop of meaningless noise. Jennifer served wine and food, playing the perfect hostess, while her eyes constantly returned to Margaret and Thomas like a vulture watching carrion. "Well," Jennifer finally set down her glass, the crystals clink against the table, sounding like a funeral bell. "I think it's time for my announcement." "Jennifer," Margaret interrupted, her voice barely trembling, "forgive me, but I'm not feeling well. I think I ate too much." Jennifer's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You're not feeling well?" "It's my stomach. Maybe I should go lie down for a moment." "I don't feel well either," Thomas added, touching his chest with a trembling hand. "My heart is bothering me." Michael immediately stood. "Grandpa, do you need your pills?" "Yes, son. They're in my room." "How strange." Jennifer's voice cut the air like a knife. "That both of you get sick at exactly the same time, right before my announcement." David frowned. "Jennifer, they're elderly people." "Don't be insensitive." "I'm not being insensitive, David. I'm being realistic." She turned toward Margaret with cold eyes. "Mrs. Margaret, are you sure you need to leave? Because my announcement directly involves you two." Margaret felt her heart racing. Jennifer, I really don't feel well. Then maybe you should hear my news now. It might make you feel better. Jennifer stood, walking around the table with measured steps. You see, David and I have been very worried about you lately. Worried? Thomas asked, though he already knew where this was leading. Yes, your health, your age, the difficulties you face day by day. So we've made a decision. She made a theatrical pause. We've found wonderful places where you'll receive professional care 24 hours a day. Silence fell like a stone in still water. What? David blinked, confused. What are you talking about? My love, we've discussed this. Your parents need more care than we can give them here. No, we haven't discussed this. David stood, his confusion transforming into alarm. Of course we have. Remember when I mentioned how difficult it was getting to care for them? The medical bills, the stress. Margaret and Thomas stood up. It was now or never. David, Thomas spoke with a firm voice despite his fear. Your wife has been planning to put us in separate nursing homes, in cheap places where, according to her own words, accidents happen naturally. Jennifer's face transformed, the mask of sweetness vanishing to reveal pure fury. That's a ridiculous lie. It's not a lie. Michael pulled out his phone. I have recordings of all your phone conversations, Mum. I know exactly what you were planning. Michael, give me that phone right now. No. The boy positioned himself in front of his grandparents, protecting them with his body. Dad needs to hear the truth. David, Jennifer turned to her husband with instant tears. Don't believe them. They're confused, sick. Your son is making up stories. Then listen to this. Michael pressed play. Jennifer's voice filled the dining room. I'll tell them it's a day center, only a few hours. By the time they realize it's permanent, it'll be too late. I care about getting them out of my house as soon as possible. They've fulfilled their purpose. They gave birth to my husband. Now they're a burden. Color drained from David's face. Jennifer, what is this? It's manipulation. That audio is edited. There's more, much more. Michael walked toward his father, extending the phone. She planned to separate them in places 200 miles apart, so they'd die alone. David took the phone with shaking hands. He listened to clip after clip, his expression transforming from shock to horror, to a sadness so deep it seemed to age him 10 years in seconds. My God, he finally whispered. Jennifer, how could you? It was for your good, for our good. That house is worth $500,000, and while they're alive, we can't sell it. The confession came out before she could stop it. The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret touched Thomas's arm. Let's go. Wait. David turned to his parents, tears running down his cheeks. Dad, Mom, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. We know, son, Thomas responded, his voice breaking. But we can no longer stay here. Don't leave, please. I'll throw Jennifer out. You stay, she goes. David, it's too late. Margaret felt her own tears flowing. We need to leave. We need to be somewhere we're welcome, not tolerated. But I love you. If you loved us, son, you would have seen what was happening months ago. The words hit David like punches. He collapsed in his chair, face in his hands. Michael already had his grandparents' coats. Let's go, Uncle Sebastian is waiting. Sebastian knows about this? David lifted his head. Of course he knows, because he actually asked how we were doing. Thomas put on his coat, each movement painful but determined. He noticed something was wrong. Jennifer, watching her world crumble, launched one last attack. If you leave, I'll call the police. I'll say you're demented elderly people who don't know what you're doing. Try it. Michael faced her with courage that belied his age. And I'll show them these recordings, and then you'll be the one with legal problems. Sophia, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. Mom, did you really say all those horrible things about Grandma and Grandpa? Jennifer didn't respond. Her silence was answer enough. Margaret and Thomas walked toward the door, Michael guiding them. At the threshold, Margaret turned one last time. David, I forgive you, because you're my son and always will be. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean we can continue as if nothing happened. Mom. David's voice broke completely. Take care of yourself, son, and when you're ready to be the man we raised, you'll know where to find us. The door closed behind them. The night's cold hit them like a solid wall. Snow fell heavily now, covering streets and sidewalks with a white blanket that made each step treacherous. Neighboring houses' Christmas lights blinked cheerfully, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Can you walk? Michael asked with concern. We can, Thomas responded, tightly gripping Margaret's arm. Even if we have to crawl, We'll reach that church. They advanced slowly. Each step was a battle against the cold, against protesting knees, against lungs that burned with frozen air. But each step was also liberation, recovered dignity, the decision not to die as prisoners but to live as free people. Houses around them celebrated. Through lit windows they saw families gathered, children opening gifts, people toasting. Normal world where daughters-in-law loved their in-laws and children protected their parents. World from which they had been exiled. "One more block," Michael encouraged them, carrying their bags while supporting his grandmother. "We're almost there." St. Michael's Church appeared before them like a beacon in the storm. Its carved wooden doors were illuminated by old lanterns, and in the empty parking lot waited a car with its lights on. Sebastian jumped out of the vehicle as soon as he saw them. "Dad! Mom!" The younger son ran toward his parents, hugging them with strength that spoke of genuine love and real concern. "Thank God you're okay. Thank God." "Sebastian," Margaret sobbed against her son's chest. "I thought we'd never make it." "You're here now, you're safe." Sebastian guided them toward the car, his strong arm supporting them. "Let's go home. To your real home." As he helped his parents into the car, he looked at his nephew. "Michael, you're a hero, you know that, right?" The boy shook his head, tears freezing on his cheeks. "I just did what was right." "That's exactly what makes someone a hero." Sebastian hugged him tightly. "Will you come with us?" "I can't. Dad needs me now. And Sophia, too." Michael looked back, toward the house where his family had fractured. "But I'll visit. Every week, I promise." "We'll be waiting for you, my precious boy." Margaret extended her hand from the car, touching her grandson's face. "Thank you for saving us." The car started, slowly pulling away on snow-covered streets. Margaret and Thomas turned, looking through the rear window as the church disappeared in the distance. And beyond, the house where they had suffered so much also faded, becoming memory. "It's over," Thomas whispered, embracing Margaret. "We're free now." She nestled against him, feeling his body's warmth after the freezing walk. "I thought she'd separate us. I thought we'd die alone in those terrible places. But we won't. We'll die together, old and wrinkled, bothering each other like we've done for 51 years. Margaret laughed through tears. "Bothering? I never bother you. You lie worse than I cook." Sebastian smiled from the driver's seat, hearing the love in their jokes. "Mom, Dad, my house is small. It's not luxurious like David's, but it's yours for as long as you want to stay." "Sebastian," Thomas leaned forward, touching his son's shoulder, "a palace with serpents is hell. A shack with love is paradise." As the car moved through the snowy Christmas Eve night, leaving behind pain and betrayal, Margaret remembered a prayer her mother had taught her as a child. "Lord, give me strength not to never fall, but to always rise." They had fallen. God, how they had fallen. But tonight, under stars hidden by snow clouds, they had risen, and sometimes that's all that matters. 3 months after that Christmas Eve, Margaret woke in the small room she shared with Thomas at Sebastian's house. Morning light filtered softly through cotton curtains, so different from heavy velvet drapes at David's house that blocked every ray of sun. She lay still, listening. Thomas's peaceful breathing, birds singing, silence not loaded with invisible threats. Peace. After months in a minefield, she had forgotten how peace felt. "Good morning, my love," Thomas murmured without opening his eyes, seeking her hand under the blankets. "Good morning." Margaret intertwined her fingers with his. This simple gesture Jennifer had tried to steal forever. They rose without hurry. No one waited with criticism disguised as concern. No one timed how long they took in the bathroom. No one invented complaints about non-existent noises. In the kitchen, Sebastian was already preparing coffee. "Good morning, Dad, Mom. Did you sleep well?" The same words David used to say, but the tone was completely different. Here was genuine warmth, real interest. "Like babies," Thomas smiled, accepting the cup his son offered. "Dad, Michael is coming for lunch today." Margaret felt her heart expand. Michael kept his promise. Every Sunday without fail, the boy took 2 buses to visit them, bringing stories from the week and a love that had never wavered. "How is David?" Thomas asked, as he did every Sunday. "Different," Sebastian responded carefully. "Michael says he's waking up, I suppose, like someone emerging from a very long dark sleep." 2 hours later, when Michael arrived, he carried something in his face that Margaret hadn't seen in months. He had lost that constant tension, that permanent vigilance of someone living expecting the next attack. Grandma, Grandpa, he hugged them tightly, sinking into their warmth like someone coming home. My precious boy, you're taller every week. Margaret caressed his cheek. Oh, you're shrinking, he joked, though his eyes shone with tenderness. During lunch, Michael told them about life in the house left behind. Dad divorced Mom last week. The papers finally processed. How is he taking it? Thomas asked. I think relieved, though he won't admit it. Michael pushed food around his plate. Mom is living with her mother. Sophia says she's very changed. Quieter, like she finally understands what she lost. And your father? Margaret pressed gently. Dad? Michael searched for the right words. Dad cries a lot. Alone, when he thinks no one hears him. But I hear him. He cries for you, for all the lost time, for being so blind. Margaret felt her chest tighten. Has he asked about us? All the time. He asks if you're well, if you're happy, if... So the boy's voice broke. If someday you can forgive him. Thomas and Margaret exchanged a long look, one of those silent conversations that only 51 years of marriage allow. Tell your father, Margaret spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully, that we already forgave him, that we forgave him the night we left. But that doesn't mean, Thomas added firmly, things can go back to how they were. Forgiving isn't forgetting. Forgiving is deciding not to let poison keep killing us inside. Michael nodded, understanding the crucial difference. Would you want to see him? If he comes, I mean. Margaret looked at Thomas, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. Tell him he can come, but alone, and prepared to listen, not to ask that everything be fixed with a hug. 3 days later, the doorbell rang mid-afternoon. Sebastian opened the door and found his older brother at the threshold, aged by the weight of guilt, with deep, dark circles and sagging shoulders. Sebastian, David spoke with a hoarse voice. David. There was no hug, but also no rejection. Come in. In the small living room, where Margaret and Thomas waited, the encounter was like walking on broken glass. David stopped at the door as if he didn't dare enter completely into their space. Dad, Mom, Son, Margaret responded, her voice barely trembling. David tried to speak, but words stuck in his throat. Tears began falling before he could stop them. I don't even know where to start. Start by sitting, Thomas pointed to a chair. Standing, you'll get tired. The small gesture of consideration almost completely destroyed David. He sat, hands trembling in his lap. I was an idiot, a blind, selfish, cruel idiot. Yes, Thomas agreed without softening the truth. You were. For months I saw how Jennifer treated you. I saw the small cruelties, the poisoned words, and I told myself I was exaggerating, that it was my imagination. It wasn't your imagination, Margaret said softly. It was your cowardice. David flinched at the word but didn't contradict it. You're right. I was afraid to confront her, afraid to admit I had married someone capable of such evil, afraid of being alone. So you preferred we be alone, Thomas finished the thought. Yes. God forgive me, yes. Silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid for months. David, Margaret leaned forward. You came here looking for something. What is it? Forgiveness, you already have it. Forgetting, I can't give you that. Immediate reconciliation? That will take time we may not have. I just want... David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I want you to know I'm learning. Learning to be the man I should have been from the beginning. The man you raised. Thomas stood slowly, leaning on his cane. He walked toward his son and placed a trembling hand on his head, like when David was a child and had done something wrong. Son, life teaches us lessons. Some are gentle like a breeze, others are cruel like a storm. His voice broke. This was a storm lesson, for all of us. David stood and hugged his father, sobbing against his shoulder like he hadn't since he was a teenager. I'm so sorry, Dad. I know, son. I know. Margaret joined the embrace, her arms surrounding both men, and in that circle of shared pain and damaged but not destroyed love, something began to heal. Not everything, not quickly, but it began. The following months brought slow but profound changes. David visited every 2 weeks, never staying too long, respecting the boundaries his parents needed to establish. He brought constant apologies at first, until Margaret finally told him, Son, we no longer need more apologies. We need to see you being a better person. Actions speak louder than words, Ma. Then David changed his strategy. He began bringing things he knew they needed. Expensive medicines insurance didn't cover, special food for Thomas's diet, a thermal blanket for Margaret who suffered from arthritis. Silent acts of service that spoke louder than 1,000 "I'm sorry." One afternoon, 6 months after the escape, Margaret was in Sebastian's small garden when she heard familiar voices. She turned and saw David arriving with Sophia. The girl carried flowers. "Grandma." Sophia ran toward her with tears in her eyes. "Forgive me. I was so horrible to you. So cruel. And it wasn't even real. It was all what Mom made me say." Margaret hugged her granddaughter, feeling the adolescent body shake with sobs. "My girl, you were also a victim. Jennifer used you as a weapon without you realizing. But I said those terrible things. And now you're here acknowledging the harm. That takes courage." Margaret stroked her hair. "Forgiveness was already waiting for you. You just had to come find it." Sophia stayed that day, helping Margaret in the garden, listening to stories she had ignored for months. And when she left, something had been repaired between them. Not perfect, but real. A year after that Christmas Eve, on a quiet afternoon, Margaret and Thomas sat on Sebastian's house porch, watching the sunset. Their intertwined hands rested between them, as always. "Do you know what day it is today?" Thomas asked. "A year since we recovered our freedom. Do you regret it?" Margaret thought about the question. She thought about the pain of abandoning her son's house, about nights when she cried for the fractured family, about difficult conversations and incomplete reconciliations. "No," she finally responded, "because I learned something I never would have learned by staying." "What?" "That love isn't enduring. Love is respecting. And sometimes loving someone means walking away when staying destroys you." She squeezed his hand. Staying would have been dying slowly. Leaving was choosing to live. Thomas nodded. "And that forgiveness can exist without total reconciliation. I forgave David. I love him. But I also learned it's okay to set boundaries, even with children." Michael arrived at that moment, as he did every Sunday without fail. He brought news. "Grandma, Grandpa, Dad wants to know if you can come to dinner next Sunday. Nothing elaborate, just a simple meal. Sophia and I will be there." "And Jennifer?" Margaret asked. "Jennifer lives in another state now. She left 3 months ago. I think she finally understood there's no place for her in our family." Margaret and Thomas looked at each other, silently communicating. Finally they nodded. "Tell him yes," Margaret responded, "but at a neutral restaurant, not at the house." "I understand." "You're still not ready to go back there." "We don't know if we ever will be," Thomas admitted. "That house has too many ghosts, and that's okay." Michael sat on the step at their feet, like when he was a small child. "What's important is we're rebuilding something new. It won't be the same as before, but it can be good in a different way." Sebastian came out with fresh lemonade. "Family," he announced. "I propose a toast." They raised their lemonade glasses under the sky, painting itself orange and purple. "To second chances," Sebastian began. "To wisdom that comes from pain," Michael added. "To the courage to choose dignity over comfort," Thomas raised his glass higher. "And to love," Margaret concluded, her voice clear and strong. "The love that endures even when everything else breaks. The love that forgives without forgetting. The love that heals without erasing scars. Because those scars remind us what we survived." As the sun sank on the horizon, Margaret thought about all the women her age who perhaps faced similar situations. How many suffered in silence, believing they had no options? How many let themselves be mistreated because they thought it was their duty to endure? "Thomas," she said softly, "if I could give advice to someone going through what we went through, what would you tell them?" He thought for a long moment. "I'd tell them it's never too late to choose your own dignity, that you can love someone and still walk away if that someone destroys you. That sacrifice stops being noble when it becomes self-destruction. And I would add," Margaret continued, "that forgiveness is for you, not for who hurt you. You forgive to free yourself from hatred's poison, not to give the other permission to keep hurting you." Michael listened attentively. At 18 years old, he had learned lessons some never learn in an entire lifetime. "Grandma, Grandpa, thank you," he said simply. "For what, son?" "For teaching me that being strong isn't never falling, it's always getting up." That night, in their room's privacy, Margaret and Thomas prepared for sleep with the rituals of 52 years together. He brushed her hair. She prepared his medicine. Small acts of love that Jennifer had tried to steal from them forever. "Margaret," Thomas said as they lay down, "do you think David finally understands?" "I think he's on the way. Real understanding takes time." She nestled against him. But I'm proud of him for trying. And us? Do you think we did the right thing? I know we did the only thing we could do, survive, and not just survive, live. Margaret closed her eyes. And that, my love, is all we can ask at this age. To live with dignity until our last breath. Thomas held her tighter. Together. Always together. And in the soft darkness of their small room, in the house where they were loved and respected, Margaret and Thomas fell asleep. No longer as prisoners awaiting execution, but as survivors who had chosen life. Margaret and Thomas's story didn't end with a perfect fairy tale ending. David never fully recovered the relationship he had destroyed. Jennifer never asked for real forgiveness. Some wounds healed, others left permanent scars. But they learned that life rarely offers perfect resolutions. What it offers are choices. Stay or leave, forgive or embitter, close your heart or keep it open despite pain. And they chose life. They chose dignity. They chose love. And sometimes, in an imperfect world, that's enough. Because at the end of the day, the greatest lesson isn't about never being hurt. It's about refusing to let that hurt define the rest of your story. It's about understanding that you deserve respect, even from family, especially from family. It's about knowing that leaving a toxic situation isn't abandonment, it's self-preservation. That saying no more isn't selfishness, it's survival. That protecting your peace isn't cruelty, it's wisdom. Margaret and Thomas taught everyone around them that age doesn't mean you surrender your right to dignity. That being elderly doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. That needing help doesn't mean tolerating abuse. They showed that true strength sometimes looks like weakness to those who've never had to make impossible choices. That courage sometimes means walking away with nothing but your self-respect intact. And most importantly, they proved that it's never, ever too late to choose yourself, to choose peace, to choose life.